everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for dialing into our Morgan McKinley Success Series webinar today, which is titled How to Effectively Negotiate Your Salaries in 2016 in conjunction with Emolument crowdsourced pay data. Before I get into the webinar, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping rules. But before that, I wanted to say that I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome some of our Morgan McKinley panelists, along with Thomas Drewry from Emolument. Just in terms of dialing in, if you're experiencing any issues, you can dial in using your phone. You can also use your computer using the speakers or headphones. In terms of running through some housekeeping tips, first the audio. We will be recording this webinar, so if you experience any technical issues, it will be available in the Media Center on our website. And if you've registered, you will also receive a link via email following the webinar with a link to the video. So please don't worry if you miss some of the session or if you're unable to hear us. We will make sure that everyone who has expressed an interest will receive a copy. We will also be taking questions during the webinar. You can do so by submitting a question via the chat feature on your webinar control panel, which will appear on your computer screen. We're also live on social media. If you'd like to join in the conversation, we'd love to have you on there. Please tweet us at Morgan McKinley, that's all one word, and we're using the hashtag Success Series today. So we look forward to conversing with you on our social media channels. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in now. In terms of what we'll be covering today, there'll be a few polls on questions relating to salaries, so watch out for those. We'll be going through 5 vital tips. So today we're aiming to equip you with the knowledge that you need to go out and tackle those salary negotiation questions. We'll also be looking at timing, so when is the best time to approach this delicate, conversation, etc. And we'll also be taking some questions and answers from the audience, and many of you have kindly submitted your questions beforehand, so we will try and cover as much of those as possible. Let me welcome our host today. So we have Thomas Drewry, who is the CEO and founder of Emolument.com. We have Julia Brock, who is the manager of the sales and marketing division at Morgan McKinley Hong Kong. And we have Lionel Kaidatzis, who is the managing director of Morgan McKinley Tokyo. Before I move over, I'll just let them all say a quick hello and tell us a bit more about themselves. So over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, CEO and founder of Emolument.com. Before I did that, I spent a few years in investment banking before setting up and running an executive search firm in financial services. So I'd like to think that I have experience in guiding people through delicate conversations around remuneration.
Brilliant. Thank you, Thomas. And Julia?
Hi everybody, good afternoon and good evening. I have over 10 years recruitment experience, which essentially means that I've had 10 years experience of helping people to negotiate their salaries, and the experience that I've had has been across Asia Pacific, the UK and Europe, and I've been predominantly specialising in mid to senior level vacancies across commerce industries.
Excellent, thank you, Julia. And Lionel, lastly over to you.
Good afternoon everybody. I manage the Tokyo office. I'm the country manager for Japan. Approximately 13 years of recruitment experience, of which spent the last 10 years out here in Japan.
Excellent. Thanks, Lionel. Thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. On the webinar today, we're going to kick off with a very quick poll. The poll that we are kicking off with is, do you expect to receive a pay rise or a salary rise this year? So I'm now going to share the results. So you should all see the results on your screen. So it's really interesting then. 17% of the audience have said no. They're not expecting a pay rise this year. So perhaps with some of our tips, you might be prepared to have some, open discussions with your employers this year about that. 48% have said yes, which is fantastic. That's almost half of you are expecting a pay rise this year. Interesting results, right, Thomas?
Yeah, it's good.
Good.
Things seem to be good in APAC.
Fantastic. It's interesting because we've just released our Q1 APAC Employment Monitor, the barometer that looks at hiring and vacancies across APAC, particularly in financial services. And some of our data from our partners Emolument has actually shown that salaries are on the increase between 10 and 15% as a ballpark figure across APAC. So perhaps some of you are, within that 10 to 15%. 21% are not sure. So again, hopefully our tips and advice today will help you. And then the rest individuals are either in between roles or not currently employed. So thank you everyone for taking part in that poll today. And now back to the webinar itself. So I'm going to kick off and shortly I'll hand you over to Thomas. We're going to look at the 5 vital tips. So the first tip when it comes to salary negotiation is doing your homework. So Thomas, can you tell us a bit more about doing your homework and what you would advise the guys on the call today around this, please?
Yeah, of course, Amy. I think just before I start, I just want to frame the whole notion of salary negotiation. Broadly speaking, I've always looked at it as being quite binary. Either you're negotiating your remuneration in the context of your existing employment, in which case you will have that conversation probably in the context of an annual review, performance review. It'll be with your existing employer, line manager or HR, depending on how the company is structured, or you're negotiating your salary as you are changing jobs. And again, that will either be directly with your prospective employer if you have been in a recruitment process without a third party involved, or through a third party, i.e. a recruitment consultant. There's a notion out there that salary negotiation has to be confrontational, and I'd like to move away from that. There is nothing wrong about being assertive when you're discussing remuneration. There's nothing awkward about it. There doesn't need to be anything awkward about it. As long as you are well prepared, well rehearsed, and you know where you're heading, the conversation doesn't have to be confrontational, and no one will take umbrage for you making your case and standing your ground. So the first thing you've got to do is really prepare. And that means really getting as much data as you can on the lay of the land. And that's why we set up the business at Emolument.com. We realized there was a dearth of reliable, accurate, and real-time pay data available in some sectors. And we harvest data from professionals like you, curate that data, and then return it to you so you can benchmark yourself against your peers, look up and down the food chain, look across geographies, across functions. And I really encourage you to take a quick look. It doesn't take long at all, and I think you'll find it valuable. The other thing that you really need to understand is the lay of the land at the company you are looking to join. And that really means understanding how they think about remuneration. Do they place a big emphasis on salary? Do they place a big emphasis on the variable piece, bonus or commission? Do they have strict bands or grids? And that is really something you need to be armed with before any conversation. Some companies will have very little wiggle room on the basic salary front, but you'll be able to get a better deal on the variable piece. So just know this in advance so you can pick your battles when it comes to the actual negotiation.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for those tips, Thomas. Just on the area of doing your homework, I'd just like to add a question there that came in from someone in the audience or someone who registered in Australia. And I'll perhaps direct this to Julia. So Julia, the person has asked, what should I do if my company has a grid or a band of salaries, if you like, and isn't prepared to change it? So, how useful is, looking at salary guides or emolument data and trying to approach negotiation that way, if there's not much wiggle room?
Sure. So I think it is very tricky if you're working for an MNC that does have very strict pay grades. It is unlikely that you will be able to actually change those. So I think really what you need to do is you need to understand at this point what are the requirements to be getting up to the next level in terms of what are the key competencies that next level requires, what's the level of accountability. You need to be able to understand what you need to do as an individual to be able to reach those goals, and what objectives could be set for you in order to get up to that next level. I think you will also need to be researching the rest of the market to understand whether or not those pay grades and those scales are in line with with the industry that you're operating within, as not all companies will necessarily have be paying market rate. So if you are working for an organisation that is perhaps the pay scales are out of sync from the rest of the market, then it might be wise to consider looking for a move if you really don't feel you're going to get that increase that you deserve and that is your value in the market.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your advice there, Julia. Hopefully that was useful to this particular individual in Australia. We also have a few other questions that have come in relating to this particular area. So the first one, I think perhaps Julia and Lionel, you might be best placed to answer initially. So obviously, bearing in mind that you're both, working in different areas of Asia Pacific, how would an expat who is relocated to Asia Pacific find a way to, I suppose, benchmark their salaries for particular roles when they are new to that market? So let's say, for example, we have someone moving from London or Paris or, say elsewhere in Europe, for example. How do you advise that individual to approach this? And let's perhaps start with Lionel on that question.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's probably quite important to distinguish between two scenarios when individuals are relocating to Asia Pac, whether it's an internal move or an external move. I think if it's an internal move, there is some very good resources out there, and actually I'll let Julia perhaps host one of the information sources that she's aware of a little bit later on. I think that for anybody who's looking to make an external move, I think your sources are to really look at the market, and I think you should be out there looking at there's all sorts of sources, bonus guides, salary guides. You can look at Emolument will give you some indication there, but I do think that there is a big argument here to actually approach a specialist within your space. They should be able to give you a pretty detailed outline of what market value is. And I also think that you probably need to make sure that you understand what your market value is. It is in a lot of instances perhaps fair to say that if you're moving to a new location, are you going to be able to hit the ground running? And if you aren't going to be able to hit the ground running, you may need to perhaps manage your own expectations of what's realizable. So yeah, I think the real reason, there's a number of sources there, but I would suggest that a specialist recruiter within your space would give you a lot of advice as to what your real market value is and what might be an appropriate benchmark for you.
Brilliant. And Julia, I know you have some interesting resources that you recommend to candidates, so it'd be good to hear from you.
Sure. So, in addition to learning what the different pay grades might be for your particular industry or skill set, you also will. I always advise candidates that if they're relocating to a new country, they need to understand the cost of living in that country. And I know that seems quite a basic thing, but I think you need to know whether or not you can afford to live in Hong Kong or to live in Tokyo if you're coming from Manchester or London or Sao Paulo or wherever it might be. So there is actually a website that I usually advise candidates to use, which is called numbeo.com, which is spelled Numbeo, and you can actually enter in your current location, and the location that you're intending to move to, and it compares, they have a huge database which actually enables them to compare everything from the tax, the employment tax that is applicable to that country, to housing costs, to school fees, and even down to things like groceries and prices of restaurants, which of course all comes, all forms your monthly outgoing and costs. So I find that extremely useful. And then, once you're armed with that information, you can then go away and really work out what you're likely to be spending on a monthly, yearly basis in that country, and what you can afford to live on salary-wise. Because Lionel is right, if you are relocating to a new market in a new region that you have no previous experience in, you may have to be prepared to take a slight drop in your salary to get that that regional experience.
That's excellent. Thank you, Julia. So it's numbeo.com. I'll make sure that we share that across our social media sites later as well for anyone who wants to visit that website. So just moving over to the next question quickly. So the question is around how can you find out your market salary if you feel that you're actually, your responsibilities are much bigger than, say, your job title or job description. And just to give some context, the actual, the specifics of that question, which came in from an individual in Singapore who asked or said that they are a director of administration, but they feel they're often pigeonholed as an office manager, whereas their responsibilities are more equivalent to a CAO or a head of operations, in a big organization. So, how would one tackle that scenario? So perhaps Thomas could offer us his opinion on that particular question, please.
I'll try. I think it's a case of, again, looking at your job description as holistically as possible, and looking at other factors that would help you define the role better. So company size is often a good indication. A COO or a CAO or a CFO isn't going to be paid the same at a 50-person company or at a FTSE 250 company. So that will inform. And in fact, we break down our results by company size to help people navigate those conversations. Also, it's about thinking, as Lionel said earlier, what is your real value? If your value is akin to that of a CAO, then that's the job you need to be benchmarking yourself against. And also, as Julia mentioned earlier, look at are you ticking all the boxes in terms of the skills that are required? If you are doing the job of a CAO, well, first of all, you should go to bat and make sure that achievement is recognized internally. And if it is not recognized internally, perhaps ask yourself whether another company elsewhere would recognize your talents better and allow you to progress more quickly.
So unless anyone has a point to add, I'm just going to move on because I know there are questions coming in. So just a quick reminder about our partnership with Emolument.com. You can access their benchmarking tool across all of our APAC websites, either via discipline or there may be a specific page on the home page. Again, we'll make sure that some of those links are also shared socially and in the follow-up email should you wish to have a look at those. We would encourage you to do so. And we also recently released APAC salary guides for 2016 across all of the websites. So two really good resources there that you can access from Morgan McKinley to do your research on your salary. The next point that we want to go into is around setting your limits. So again, I will hand you over to Thomas to tell us what he means by setting limits.
Yeah, I think it's about being very clear in your head about what you are willing to accept, or what you are shooting for. So whenever I was guiding people through conversations or helping clients decide how to put their best foot forward in terms of an offer, there is the sort of the ideal one, the quote me happy number, the one that will probably cause for large celebration at home or in an expensive restaurant. The one that you'll accept. It's the acceptance. It won't put a big smile on your face, but you'll feel comfortable accepting it, and then there is the walk-away number. Anything under that number will not be acceptable to you. Now, that's very theoretical, and it's quite sort of monochrome as well. What you also need to do is have a conversation with yourself about which components of the offer or the pay package are most important to you. Is it the base salary? Is it the performance bonus? Do you want stock or stock options, if those are available? Non-monetary benefits, which are increasingly factored into people's decision frame, company car, pension scheme, health insurance, etc. And that will depend largely on your individual circumstances, your personal fixed cost base. Do you have a big mortgage? Do you have school fees to pay? You need to take the whole picture into consideration and know in advance where to focus your negotiation efforts. And you don't have to do this alone. I think it's really helpful to run some numbers, with, mum and dad, with wife, girlfriend, husband, boyfriend, close friends, just to get a different perspective on things and just get chatting.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Thomas. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we've actually got another poll that I've just set up to run, and we want to ask our attendees, other than basic salary, what is the most important part or the most important element for you when considering your remuneration package? So there's non-monetary benefits, there's the performance bonus, there's stock or stock options, and then there's the other sort of benefits such as company car, pension scheme, health insurance, etc. So it'd be great if you could all vote on our poll now. I can see the results going up. Let's close that and let's just have a quick look at the results. So I'm sharing the results with everyone now. So 22% of you said that non-monetary benefits were most important. 38% said the performance bonus. Only 5% were interested in stock or stock options, and I think it's 35% there. Sorry, I can't quite see the screen, it's quite far from me, have said benefits. So an interesting breakdown of results there. What are your thoughts on those, Lionel, perhaps? Is that what you would expect to see based on speaking to candidates across, Asia Pacific or in particular in Japan?
Yeah, I'm quite surprised by them actually. I would have thought that the performance bonus is normally, outside of basic salary, would be the number one priority for most individuals. Certainly within, if I take Tokyo, I think flexi time is becoming more prominent as a benefit that people would desire. I think stock and stock options is predominantly something that's wanted within the financial services industry. Yeah, quite surprising. I would have thought the performance bonus would have been slightly higher there in terms of percentages.
I think it also depends on our panel, on our audience, and what sort of roles and functions they're operating in, as Lionel said, in industries, and also what level, because stock options would usually be much more important at the more senior end of the spectrum.
Okay, excellent. Third point we want to cover here is around how you can create some options for yourself. So going direct or using a third party. Again, let me hand you over to Thomas to kick off this point. So I think we're talking about whether you negotiate directly or whether you use, an intermediary such as a recruiter, etc. So over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, so I mean, look, obviously, if you're negotiating with your existing employer, you will have to do that directly. That goes without saying. I think whenever possible, use a third party. Those conversations, can become frictional. They can become a bit emotional, and let a professional do their job and help you smooth those conversations over. I mean, it's really. There's no merit in trying to have those conversations directly. Some people might try to ask you, put you on the spot during an interview. We'll tackle that a bit later. But I think if you are going to change jobs, I think the first thing you really ought to do is create some options. Now, clearly, if it's a very tough market, that might prove quasi-impossible. If it's an okay market, ideally you want to have 2 or 3 conversations running in parallel so that when the time comes to make the move, you have at least spoken to another party and get a different perspective on your value in the market and what it may look and feel like working for someone else. It's also a way of attracting an improved proposition. Now, a word of caution here, do this carefully and tactfully, as it could backfire if your prospective employer thinks that you're being mercenary or just trying to hold them to ransom. So again, it'll be how you package this, and this would be done much better through, again, your recruitment partner. And it'll, create some options. It'll give you more confidence during the interview process as well, and give you some mental strength.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Thomas. And then I suppose maybe let's go into a bit more depth with Lionel and Julia. What's the best way then for a professional to work with a recruitment consultant in order to get, the salary or the package that they are after?
As recruiters, is twofold. So we're here to manage our candidates, expectations, and also manage our clients' expectations, and try to meet in the middle and try to ensure that the individuals that we are helping to find new roles, that we are negotiating on their behalf, but that we're really also doing that within reason. So I think my approach is if a candidate, I must know the current salary of the person that I'm representing. So that's an absolute given. And at times, sometimes I understand that you guys might not want to provide that information, possibly because you might be underpaid, and you feel that will weaken your ability to negotiate. But it is critical. That information will come up, throughout further down the line anyway, which your employer will be made aware of once you're working for them. And then I think, secondly, I would always ask what are their expectations. And really, it's amazing how many people have expectations of 25%, 30% increase, but actually can't articulate why. So it's really, really very important when you're when you are talking to your recruiter, if you have expectations that are above average, which is probably 10 to 15%, but probably varies from country to country, that you have a solid reason, you're able to demonstrate that you feel that you're significantly underpaid.
Okay, that's really useful. Thank you, Julia. And you've kind of touched on this already, but let's perhaps direct this to Lionel firstly. If someone is interviewing for a new position and they're asked, by the interviewer or the hiring manager directly the question, what salary or what type of salary are you looking for? What would be the best way to answer that question? So Lionel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think as Thomas and Julia mentioned a moment ago, I think in every instance, if you can defer to a third party, that's definitely your preferred route here. And I think, as Thomas pointed out, the propensity is that sometimes people can get at loggerheads when it comes to negotiation on compensation. However, the reality of it is that sometimes you have no choice but to actually negotiate for yourself. So in those instances, I would suggest that you certainly reiterate first and foremost that the role is of primary interest here rather than the package. That is obviously important, but it's not the number one reason why you're speaking to them. I would also suggest that there could be an element, and you could potentially even use it as a tactic to defer by suggesting that it really depends on the total package on offer rather than what sort of basic salary, and without really understanding an organization's compensation structure, it's quite difficult to answer that question. However, if really pushed to discuss current compensation and what sort of range that you're actually looking for, you need to be prepared, and I would probably add that, your recruitment consultant, if you're using one, should always, and to get the most out of your recruitment consultant, you should certainly get them to assist you with preparation on how to answer these questions and even practice it. I would suggest that what you should probably discuss at that point is your current compensation level and the sort of range that you're looking for as an increase, and throw the ball back in their court and potentially ask them, what are you thinking for this position?
Julia, would you agree or have anything to add on that one?
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree, and I think we've probably covered that question. But unless there are any other questions coming in and people don't feel they've got adequate information.
No, not at the moment, but I'll have a look at the end, and if there's any particular questions, we'll cover that off. But what I'll do is I'll move on to the next section now. So the next sort of vital tip is around so playing the game when it comes to salary negotiation, and I think Thomas has some particularly interesting points on this one.
Yeah, I mean it's nothing groundbreaking, I'm afraid, but it's just reiterating that negotiation really is a game. So try to remember that even when some meaningful numbers are at stake, and if you've ever played poker or watched good players in action, you'll know that the key is to keep a straight face and your composure at all times, and you should do the same. But again, you shouldn't really be to Lionel's point earlier, you shouldn't be having those conversations directly in an interview room. This is scripted for television, but this shouldn't really happen in real life. You should, all your compensation information should have been given to your recruitment consultant, so he or she will have that, and he or she will have had that conversation with the client, and you need to focus on skills, why you're looking forward to joining the organization, the career progression, the actual job, the size of the team, who you're reporting to, prospects. I mean, all the things that are away from monetary. And if you are, again, cornered into that situation, again, I would bat the ball back and say that you're still doing your research, that this is an important decision for you, that you don't take things lightly, you're a thorough individual, that you do your homework, and that you are still gathering data and you're not in a position to give an informed answer just yet. And you're, as Julie said, you're basically buying time. Also, we live in a world where email is more and more common, and there is, if you are in a direct conversation, i.e. not intermediated by a recruiter, there is nothing wrong in saying in an interview, look, this is a very important subject, please allow me to sleep on it, and I will send you an email tomorrow with my follow-up thoughts. And again, this is about depersonalizing the conversation. And when you do put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, essentially it's not about saying I want, I need, whatever. It's about making a case for, my research indicates that someone in my position, at my level of responsibility, at a company of a similar size, would look to earn between X and Y, and make that range quite narrow and as specific as possible. And this is where, again, a tool like Emolument can help you, because we provide distribution curves, so you can really home in on where the bulk of the data, the clusters, very, very granularly. And just drop that in a nice email, which you will have had a chance to take time drafting and thinking about.
That's excellent. Thank you, Thomas. And then, so around this point, it's all about, having the right attitude, remaining professional, and objective. So there are a few questions that we've had come in prior to the session. So the first one, I think I'll direct that at Lionel, because it comes from an individual, Masayuki in Japan, says, what type of response or attitude should one express if they are actually offered a salary that's then therefore lower than the expectation that they had expressed? So, how do they go about tackling, that issue?
I would suggest, and I think Thomas pointed this out a little bit earlier, saying that first and foremost, you should keep emotion out of this conversation. And I think where a lot of people naturally may struggle is if they're avoiding showing their disappointment. I would suggest that you probably then need to make sure, first and foremost, take a breath and really confirm that you really understand the full extent of what is actually being offered. I think we've all perhaps made the point today that it isn't just about what basic salaries put on the table. There's a whole load of other things that make up somebody's compensation package, so you need to ensure that you understand that fully. And actually, if you don't understand that fully, it may be even worth taking away with you to look at it and then come back with a measured answer as to what you actually think. However, I would also then perhaps point out that if it is, you really are in the position that you need to play the game and negotiate, I would refer back to the sort of 3 points that were discussed earlier. If it didn't meet your most favorable position and what you really, really wanted, but did sort of meet your sort of realistic target position, there's no harm in testing the boundaries and sort of, perhaps saying, it's a good offer, but perhaps slightly lower than you were expecting. You'd like to think it over, but just out of interest, is there any flexibility here that we could potentially look at improving the offer and throw it back at them? I think if the number thrown away is a really walk-away level and it really isn't what you'd be prepared to accept, I think you can probably afford to be a little bit more assertive with it. Talk a little bit more about specific and measurable results of what you would hope to achieve and what you have achieved. Explain that the package is lower than you were expecting, and then throw the ball back into their court and see, what solutions they can actually propose here. You'll be very surprised that as using silence as a tool, once you've thrown the ball back in somebody's court, as to what they come back with and what sort of indications they might be able to give that they'll be able to do for you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Lionel. So silence is important there as well. That's a good point. So the next question is slightly different, but I think it's just worth covering quickly. So we had a question in from someone in Australia who is a contractor. So the contractor has said if they have previously received a higher rate for a previous contract role, how do they convince their current employer, who perhaps is offering them a slightly lower, I assume, daily rate, that they will stay loyal to that organisation? So, Julia, what would be your views on this? I think when we discussed it earlier, you had some views about, culture and
Sure.
maintaining a particular approach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think with this one, I think it's important to remember that money isn't the be-all and end-all. And I realize that the topic of this webinar is negotiating, salary and making sure that you are correctly remunerated in your space. However, I think if you're in an organization where maybe you did take a slight pay cut, there might be a number of reasons that you chose to do that. And it could be because ultimately it's a better business to work for. You may have slightly better work-life balance. You might spend more time with your family or your friends, or you might have a slightly improved social life as a result of taking this role, and therefore you're prepared to take a slight dip. But in terms of actually how you demonstrate all of these things to your employer, I think it's really through your work, through your attitude, through your commitment, through your results and delivery of projects, etc. And I think as long as you're able to put a smile on your face and you're showing that you're enjoying what you're doing, then I think you should be able to convince them that you're not about to leave just because the next better offer comes along. I think those people that they might suspect would do that would be the ones that are having the opposite effect in the workplace and maybe aren't working hard. They might just be working very narrowly to their job description and not getting involved in other projects and not collaborating not, maybe particularly good team workers, and those would be the ones that an employer would have a question mark over them in terms of if they're going to go or not.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That was really helpful, Julia. So just moving on, we don't have too much time left, so we're coming up to questions, but the very last area that we'll cover is the importance of timing. So a few questions have come in around timing already, which are up on the screen. And then again, I think I'll get Thomas to just share his views on timing and how to tackle that.
Well, look, again, I think it's, unless there's a very, very good reason, and that's an event of sorts, to prompt a salary negotiation halfway through the year, I would advocate against it. There is an annual review, which is linked to, performance review. That is the right time, if not the only time, to bring up the topic of remuneration and contextualize it. Because I think remuneration conversations without context can be quite dangerous. And you end up negotiating a vacuum. Everything we've talked about this afternoon is around, not just looking at the remuneration piece in isolation, but link it back to skills, the job, what you've achieved, agreeing some deliverables for the coming year, pegging a number or an increase in remuneration based on increased responsibilities or increased performance. And so I think that is better done in the context of an annual review. That's something I feel quite strongly about.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Thomas. So I think the first question there is about the right time to negotiate. And I think the background to the question may have been that, in some organizations there may not be a very formal appraisal process or annual review, or maybe the individual is, outside that period and they want to know, how do they find the right time to approach their employer to negotiate perhaps a pay review or increase. So I'll ping that question over to Julia initially, please.
So I think with this, so if you're working for maybe a smaller organisation or an organisation that's a little less structured, that doesn't have a formal review process, and therefore you don't know when to sort of ask the question. I generally think that if you've been able to build up some strong results and you've been able to deliver, to some some good deadlines and complete certain projects, and you've had good feedback, I think that that's usually a good time to sort of put the question to your manager as you've now, I feel like I've now proven myself in this role, and I appreciate the feedback. I'm really at a point now where having researched the market and knowing what the pay scales are in other organisations, etc. Look, what are the opportunities for for an uplift on the package. So I think if you've been getting endorsements from within the business, from your manager and more senior people within the business, and you've had that recognition, then that's usually a good time to ask.
Okay, excellent. And then we've had another question in and also a question on the webinar itself, so I'll kind of roll these into one. So given that individuals may be at different career stages, I've got one question which is relating to how would a graduate approach salary discussions if they are new to the jobs market, so they don't have a previous role to benchmark against. And also a similar question from someone who said if they're currently unemployed and they're looking for a new role, how do they try and convince the hiring managers that they're meeting to offer them a salary that's either comparable or higher to their previous role if they've been perhaps unemployed for some time. So let's run that one past Thomas first, especially with relation to the graduates, because I know you've done some work around that space.
Yeah, we've opened up the site to graduates. Obviously, graduates don't have an existing remuneration profile to submit, but we felt it was very important to give the same decision-making tools to graduates as we give other more experienced professionals. So again, graduate process, again, this is not my area of expertise, I have to say, graduate recruitment, so please feel free to butt in if I'm speaking out of turn here, but most companies that hire graduates of a certain size will have a process in place, and therefore you will be guided through those conversations. You will be guided through those conversations, and there is an entry level, and I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room from a basic salary standpoint when you're a graduate. I think this is the easiest phase to get an uplift on what the market is paying.
Okay, very good. And Lionel, any views on either the graduates or the person who's perhaps unemployed for a long period of time and wants to match or exceed their previous employed salary?
I guess on graduates, I think very much with what Thomas said, I think that I would probably focus more on what is the sort of medium to long-term opportunity rather than what's your payday going to be tomorrow. Clearly everybody wants as good a deal as possible, but I think that shouldn't be at the expense of what career path you can go down and what your future earnings could be. So I'd certainly factor that into any early discussions, and I think in large organizations there probably isn't much wiggle room. In smaller organizations, and I think you really do need to take a view as to sort of where will you go in the future. I think for individuals that are unemployed and looking to move into an organization, I think it depends really. I think it depends on whether you're moving in a similar line to what your former career was or whether you're moving into a new career. I think if you are sticking to your old career, unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, a lot of employers, you have slightly less leverage on salary negotiations because the view is that we can perhaps squeeze the person a little bit more. Now, unfortunately, that is just the reality of it. I think where you need to be very smart about this is do your research, don't sell yourself short. Certainly get your recruiter involved if using one to negotiate the best package for you. I think if you're looking to take a step into a new area or something slightly different, I think you need to be quite realistic, as to your ability to hit the ground running, and you probably need to manage your expectations. And I guess to what I said a moment ago about graduates, you probably need to take a view on, what's not the immediate, or rather not the immediate benefit, but what's the sort of midterm to long-term benefit of moving into that position and the longer-term consequences on your compensation.
That's excellent. Thank you, Lionel. Okay, I think we're going to go on to questions now. So some of the audience who are currently dialed in have sent some through. I'm going to have a look through those, and we had some that were emailed in to us as well. So let's start with one of the questions that was emailed across. So we've already covered earlier on the question around answering, if the hiring manager says, what type of salary are you looking for? But also someone in Hong Kong is keen to know, do we always have to disclose our current salary to a prospective employer? So if you're being interviewed, etc., and they say, what are you currently on? Do we actually have to give that information away, or, can we choose not to disclose? So I'll be interested to probably get all of your input. So let's perhaps start with Julia.
Okay, so with this one, I think it's a yes, without any shadow of doubt, unfortunately. It's really critical to our clients that they have that information. In my experience, if we don't disclose that information at the outset, it will be damaging to that candidate's application. So, I have clients that just wouldn't accept an application from somebody that hasn't disclosed their current salary. And my advice is, to anybody that's concerned about disclosing their salary, usually it's because they're feeling very underpaid and they want to, they feel it, as this person said, will jeopardize their bargaining power. If you're working with a good recruiter and they have a good relationship with their client, then they should be able to help to negotiate a fair salary for you. It is tricky if you are extremely underpaid and you're expecting a very big increase, because unfortunately the way that a HR manager or a HR director will structure an offer will be based on a number of factors. It will be partly based on the candidate's current salary, but it will also be based on their own internal gradings for that role, on the individual, how much the individual has influenced and impressed the interview, whether or not that person meets all of the criteria for the role. So just disclosing your salary, if it is below average, below market rate, doesn't necessarily mean you suddenly lose bargaining power. It does mean that you need to be very good in your interview in influencing them that you are, that you're underpaid essentially.
Okay, and Lionel, any other points that you wanted to add on that one?
No, I think Julia covered that very succinctly. I think, yeah, Henry, my advice on this is you categorically do need to develop that information. So long as you've done your research and you have strong enough arguments as to why you feel that you need an increment of whatever it might be, you're more than likely to get it. I just think that the propensity for somebody to take a real negative view on you not disclosing that information is way, way too great. It's a big, big, big risk.
Yeah, it's a big no-no in my experience. And I think what I used to say to clients is, the reason why he or she is in this recruitment process in the first place is because he feels undervalued, both professionally and monetarily. And so, she's looking for a premium to her existing remuneration, and that's a perfectly valid case to make.
Okay. Excellent. We've had one question in which I think is quite interesting for you all to comment on. So what would be a reasonable percentage increase or uplift to expect when moving from one role to another? So I think Thomas might have some information based on their Emolument data, and Lionel and Julia, you might be able to give us some ballpark figures based on, the candidates that you're speaking to. So what's a reasonable, percentage increase then to, when moving into a new role?
Double it, I would say, is a fair. Wouldn't you say, Lionel and Julia? I think double will do. No.
That's quite punchy.
There was a big silence on the line there behind the same room. So maybe after a few gin and tonics, anything less than double won't do. But no, look, again, it's not so much about absolute numbers because, a 15%, 20% of a 100,000 base is going to look very different from a 20% off of 34, 45. It's more about, again, it's really just about doing the research and not thinking about it in terms of really in terms of percentage terms. It's taking into account the overall, is your market really hot, or is it quite stagnant, i.e. is your bonus this year still having a job? And sometimes we are in markets like this, and at other times we are in very dynamic, very vibrant, gung-ho markets where all caution is thrown to the wind, and there is a big premium year on year, 30-40%, and you can ride that wave. So I think there is no one-size-fits-all answer to that question, unless you are willing to join the civil service, in which case you can follow a grid until the day you retire and get a free pen. Sorry, the beginning of my day, I'm feeling facetious now.
No, it's good to add a little bit of humour, I think, for sure.
So no one-size-fits-all in terms of increments year on year.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. I think it depends on, I think geography has a lot to do with this. I think what the area that you specialize in, the demand for your skill set, your level, I think you need to look at the entire compensation package rather than just the base as well. I think to give a sort of rough, and I'm going to give a very wide band here, I think that the sort of average, or sort of the majority of increments would probably be, certainly from a Tokyo point of view, anywhere between 10 and perhaps 35%. Now you will have instances where people get considerably more than that and potentially less than that, but they tend to be perhaps slightly rarer.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Lionel. We've had loads of really good and interesting questions. Unfortunately, we can't answer them all as we don't have much time left. I know people want to go home or have meetings, etc., booked in. So what we'll do is we'll just cover up a couple more. So one of the questions which is up here on the slide is, how do you negotiate a salary when you know your company is cutting or scaling back within certain areas? And I believe this person is in marketing, which is usually a cost center in many organizations. So what would be the best approach there? Perhaps Julia, I know you cover sales and marketing, so let's ping this one over to you.
Sure. It's really tricky, to be very honest. I think if the company is experiencing a downturn or decline in sales and revenue, therefore they are cutting costs, to be the person that is putting your hand up that is asking for more money. It could be deemed to be rather insensitive when a company is going through a performance crisis. However, if you are deemed to be integral to your organization and you have potentially, maybe you've lost staff. I don't know if this person that's asked the question is a manager or a hiring manager or a director and have people beneath them that they've maybe lost as a result of the cost cutting measure. In that instance, it might be more feasible because ultimately that person is now doing, say, 2 people's jobs rather than 1, or 3 people's jobs rather than 1. So in that instance, it might be a slightly easier negotiation. I mean, that you're now overstretched, you're now working much harder, maybe potentially working longer hours. You're completely committed to the business. You really, you want to weather the storm, so to speak, with them, and you're loyal to them, and you're not looking around, but you do feel that it's fair that you are compensated for the additional work and responsibilities that you're carrying out.
That's excellent. Thank you, Julia. I think we need to wrap up. I'll do one more question quickly to Lionel. There was a question on contractors negotiating their daily rate. We won't put that out to the panel because I think we've kind of covered this earlier. I think if you're a contractor or you're a permanent employee, I think the same rules will still apply. It's just perhaps you're being paid differently. So we won't cover that one explicitly. And then the last question here is, Lionel, if you could maybe answer this one quickly for us. What's the best way to approach or maybe try and adapt or increase the salary if the individual's been on a, say, 1-year career break or perhaps maternity leave for, 9 to 12 months, let's say, in your experience in APAC?
I think it kind of depends on what the person's priorities and the professional's priorities going forward. I mean, again, I do apologize if I'm kind of deferring to a similar answer to before. I think that you've got to really look at the total package here and look at what are the real benefits. I think in a lot of instances that potentially, if you're talking maternity, perhaps some non-monetary benefits could be quite key here, perhaps more flexible working hours, work from home, shorter working hours, whatever the case may actually be. Other than that, I very much view it as very similar to what you would normally. You'd be taking a very similar tack and trying to obviously get the best package out of it. If somebody's been on a career break, again, sometimes what may happen there is that would you perhaps have quite as much leverage as if you had been working. It may be a little bit tougher. But at the end of the day, I think that you very much use the same tactics as what we've discussed. Okay,
that's brilliant. Thank you. On that point, I think we will close off the webinar now. I know people need to get away, meetings, etc. We've slightly gone over the 1 hour. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in this afternoon or this evening, or wherever it is you're dialing in from. We will try and address some of the other questions that have come in, either in a follow-up email or article, or feel free to get directly in contact with us at Morgan McKinley if you would like to speak to one of our recruitment consultants. And also do check out the Emolument forms on the website and also our salary guide. So on behalf of the APAC marketing team, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Lionel, Julia and Thomas for their time and expertise. It's really, really insightful, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week and weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Amy, for hosting it.
Yes, thanks, Amy.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.